Rod Grammer, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for coming today. You are the former president of Idaho Businesses for Education, correct?
That's right.
Okay. And that is an organization made up of business leaders that are advocating for education in the state of Idaho, as education is a huge function of both attracting business and supporting businesses we have.
That's for sure. Yeah. Over 200 business leaders are members of IBE. And our whole mission is to improve education in Idaho, to, I like to say, set kids up for success in school, work, and life, and create the workforce that employers need in Idaho and our economy needs.
Right. And again, it's like the workforce in Idaho needs people. We need educated people, competent people, not just in books, but that's the nature of the launch program and things of that nature. Right?
Absolutely.
We have to get a workforce that's important and relevant, right? More than anything. Talk to me then, because again, there's a hot debate going on about school choice, about sending public funds, either additional funds or replacing school funds to other places that, at this point, I haven't seen anything that shows really strict regulations or requirements of the recipients of this money. So it's from a business standpoint, we wouldn't know, like the money would be going into a black box as far as like, okay, what is it going to spit out? Is it going to spit out something that's relevant to our employer base, right? Or is it going to spit out something that, people might like, but has no relevance in the employment world? So talk to me about what your position is on this.
Well, first of all of my comments I make today are based on research, based on looking at what's happened in other voucher states, because we've had vouchers across the country in certain states since 1990. So we have a lot of data, we have a lot of knowledge about what happens when you pass vouchers. So what I try to say are facts based on what's happened and what would happen in Idaho if vouchers are passed.
Sure. And that's roughly almost, 3.5 decades worth of information.
Yeah. And especially in recent years, because in recent years, there's been this real move by some of the wealthiest people in the country to get vouchers in states like Arizona. Just passed 2 years ago, the first universal education savings account voucher program. So we have a lot of data, a lot of research on what's happened. Fundamentally, these vouchers are bad for Idaho. Well, first of all, if we pass a voucher bill in Idaho, we are violating the Idaho Constitution. In Article 9, Section 5, it's very clear that state money, taxpayers' money, cannot be used to fund religious schools. But as soon as we pass the first voucher bill, we have to start, if we give a voucher to a private school, we've got to give it to a religious school. So we'll start subsidizing religious schools, which is in direct conflict with the Idaho Constitution. The other argument is that already Idaho ranks last in the country of how much we spend per student. We lag how much we pay for our teachers. And we have $1.2 billion worth of construction and renovation needs for schools. We have schools in Idaho that are crumbling, roofs falling in, sewer in the kitchens across the state of Idaho. Terrible, unsafe teaching environments. In a state like Idaho, where we're not even funding our public education system right, we can ill afford to start subsidizing private schools and especially religious schools. It just defies common sense and fiscal responsibility. But there are other reasons.
Yeah, let me, if I may. One thing that I've heard some people say is like, well, we already offer grants or like the Pell Grant or something to religious schools like Northern Nazarene or other schools that might be private, religious universities. But I asked some people about this and they're like, yeah, okay. There may be universities that were, founded by the church or still, have some religious influence, but there's a difference between having a religious school and a school that also has a religious foundation, right? Like if you're going to a school that exclusively teaches you things like out of Bible, like a proper seminary or something like that, we're not spending money on that. Like you're going to a university that is one, accredited, has accredited curriculum, things of that nature. And yeah, maybe they have an additional credit or something like that, or access to the theology or religious studies, but you're still going to be able to take like Math 101. You're still going to have requirements for like econ or whatever the breadth requirements might be. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So yeah, although it may be founded originally or have a religious leaning, it's not like they ditched the concept of evolution. And they're like, no, we're going to teach history or we're going to teach biology and like, God made us all in 6 days. Like that's not the nature of those. Right. And whatever people think about that's none of my affair, but that's not where the money's going.
Yeah, that's a false argument. Wendy Horman tries to make that all the time. The Constitution's very clear about elementary, secondary schools. When the Constitution was adopted in Idaho, we had one university. It was the University of Idaho. So it wasn't even an issue back then. The founders were talking about K through 12. In those days, it would have been first grade through 12th grade. It's very clear the Constitution's aimed at elementary schools and secondary schools.
Understood.
It's very clear, Now,
one thing I wanted to ask you specifically, being somebody from private industry, like the businesses that are represented by, Idaho Business for Education, these are not, these are large businesses that are interested in delivering products and services effectively, as cheaply, and like as, the whole bit. It's like, that's their mission. And from that perspective, which is like, okay, these are the people that functionally need the best possible education. Is there a correlation between the free market of the existing private school structure and a superior employee or a superior partner or a superior innovator? Like from a functional standpoint, if I need the best seed idea, I need the best mechanical, mechanization, like we have a free market of private education right now. Is it spitting out a superior person than the public education for businesses?
Not at all. Not at all. We have, especially in Idaho, we have excellent public schools. And, you look at all the governors of Idaho, including our current governor, public school product of the public schools. As far as I know, Butch Otter is the only governor that actually went to Catholic schools. Almost every governor we've ever had has been educated by the public schools. Most of the presidents have been educated by the public schools, especially in the modern era. So the fact is that, and I'm not against private schools or religious schools. They have their place. What I'm against is, and what IBE's taken a position against, is using taxpayer money to subsidize really, religious schools and private schools. So, but in terms of the research is really clear that when a student moves from a public school to a private or religious school, they don't necessarily do better. In fact, the research shows that they often do worse.
Okay, now worse in what?
Academics.
Okay, because this is a real big question.
Well, and I'll tell you why it's a big question.
Okay.
The people who support vouchers keep moving the goalposts, frankly. So vouchers were started in 1990 in the state of Wisconsin. The idea was to move students out of public schools, low-income public schools, put them in private and religious schools. Well, in fact, the very first voucher bill in the country was sponsored by an African-American Democratic senator in Wisconsin. She later refuted her own law because it was essentially taken over by the middle class and the upper class and didn't serve the students she intended. So that was the original intent. So the people who supported vouchers historically said, we've got to take these students out of these public schools, put them in better private schools. But then two things happened. First, the research started showing, these students aren't doing better in the private schools, in the religious schools. So the supporters of vouchers had to pivot. So what did they pivot to? Well, they pivoted to, academics don't matter that much, but they do better. The parents are happier. The kids go on more. So they found other reasons to do it. So they pivoted away from academics. In fact, you can read a study by Nicole Garnett. Nicole Garnett, at the time she wrote this, was writing it for the Manhattan Institute, a hugely pro-voucher think tank. And in that, she even admits that students that move from public schools to private schools don't do better. And that's in her study. The second thing is that across the United States, 70% of the voucher money goes to families who've never had their kids in the public schools, ever. So basically, these programs have become a direct subsidy for families, many of them wealthy families, who have already afforded to pay their kids' tuition at private and religious schools. So this whole argument that kids do better in public and private schools, the data doesn't show that. Plus, when you got 70% of the kids who've never been in the public schools, they had to pivot to a different kind of argument. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. Representative Den Hartog, in our first conversation months and months back, brought this. She was saying, look, if somebody's already in a private school and our obligation is to provide a high quality, free education, it doesn't matter whether or not they can afford it or not. What matters is that we fulfill our obligation to that student. And I thought that was a very interesting way of addressing, like, well, look, this family can already afford this. And he's like, yeah, but that's irrelevant. The fact is that we as a state have an obligation to provide an education to that kid.
That's not what the Constitution says. Read the Constitution. She takes an oath of office to the Idaho Constitution. Everybody serving in the legislature does. They are to protect and defend and live up to the Constitution. Constitution's very clear. The Idaho Constitution is very clear in two different sections. The legislature has a mandate in Section 1, Article 9, to fund a free, uniform, and thorough free public education system. That's the mandate that she took the oath of office to do. The Supreme Court of Idaho says they're not even living up to that now. There's not a word in the Idaho Constitution that the legislature has a responsibility to fund private and religious schools. In fact, the Constitution prohibits it. So she takes the oath of office to defend the Idaho Constitution, which she does at the start of every session when she's elected. She will be violating the Idaho Constitution in two ways. She's not fulfilling it now. And if she gives money to religious schools through vouchers, she'll be violating Section 5 of the Constitution. It is clear. The other point I'd like to make is that the average Idahoan pays $1,600 for their in taxes to support their local school. And in many of our counties, it's far less than that. It's under $1,000. But the vouchers that they want to give people, Wendy Horman wants to give everybody a $5,000 tax credit that they can use in a private or religious school. That is what, almost four times what the average person is paying in taxes to support the public schools. So what they're basically doing is not just paying to replace what they're paying in taxes, they're giving them a bonus of several $1,000s. So what they're saying just doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. It's crazy math. It violates the Constitution in two ways. So
okay,
it's nuts.
Okay. Hank, they don't think it's nuts.
It is nuts.
Okay. Okay.
I'm saying it's nuts. In fact,
that's Rod's position.
It defies common sense.
Okay. Here's a question for you.
And it's illegal.
Here's a question for you. What you are, I asked you to come in because, again, representing businesses for education, I have this big question, which is, okay, if I, as a parent of 3 Idaho children, and I have kids in charter schools, which is, again, an government-funded alternative to the neighborhood public school, and kids in the just general neighborhood public school. So I have a variety. And again, I'm very thankful.
And magnet schools.
Right. We have magnet schools. We have schools of choice. Like, I'm very thankful for the variety of options that Idaho has funded for me at this point. Okay. But my question generally comes back to the pragmatic nature of the education, the relevance of the education, and how will this education serve my kids moving forward as they go into the real world. I was educated through all public schools, really bad public school system in Northern California to start K through 12. And then I was able to make it to Berkeley. I don't care for the city of Berkeley at all, but the education was fantastic. And went in as a math major, loved math, but then I switched to rhetoric, where I really learned how to, communicate very effectively. But my question is, okay, relevance. And if we do relevance as a function of what businesses want, like, what do you want? If you, as businesses, business leaders, were like, all right, look, I need this list of things to make the perfect person to come and contribute meaningfully, either as like an equity partner, as like whatever. Like, I want the sharpest knives to come out into the workforce that will not only fulfill what we need as employers now, but will attract more people. Like, damn, Idaho is producing some dynamite kids. What is that? Like, from a pragmatic standpoint, what do you want?
Well, it kind of depends on which employer you're talking to.
Sure.
And give me a
lot of different things.
Give me a little space on this. But so first of all, we're in a structural labor shortage in the United States. Almost every Western industrial country, and including India and China now, Japan, Europe for sure, and the United States, we're in a structural labor shortage. So every employer in the country and in Idaho needs educated and skilled workers. Yes. So it kind of depends. If you ask a construction company, they need different kinds of skills. If you ask a high-tech company, they've got different skills. So basically what we have to do is make sure that we're educating kids in a way that they can find their pathway. And that's the beauty of the launch program. It's the beauty of the Opportunity Scholarship, the two ways we help kids go on to post-secondary, because they can use the launch money to go into construction, into technical things. They can use it for community college, and they can use it for certain things in four-year schools. It's all, and the other beautiful thing about launch is it's pegged to some of the high demand jobs that we've got in Idaho. And quite honestly, a lot of our top 10 jobs require a lot of STEM education. Healthcare, especially, we're dying for people. Nurses, registered nurses is number one. So it depends which employer you're asking, right? Construction company needs different skills than Clearwater Analytics. Tony Wagner, who used to be at Harvard in the education department, several years ago, he went across, he was going to write a report on what employers want in their workers. He went to speak to all these CEOs around the country. He was expecting them to say, well, I need a computer programmer, I need a X. What he found was what the CEOs really wanted. They had a list of things they wanted in employees. Critical thinking, the ability to communicate, the ability to work as a team. You can go and you can Google Tony Wagner. You can see the 7 or 8 things that employers want. So those skills are especially important for employers. Many of the skills they need, they can teach the employee themselves. But that doesn't mean that they don't need a college degree or associate's degree or a workforce certificate, because they need those things. But there are these, what we call durable skills, that the employers want. The reason we call them durable skills is because technology is moving quickly. The economy is moving. We have AI now, which we didn't have 5 years ago. We didn't have cell phones 20 years ago. The economy, technology is moving so fast. But things like critical thinking, the ability to communicate, the ability to analyze information, the ability to work as a team, those skills will never change, right? You have those skills no matter what happens in the economy. Those skills are always important. So,
the need to communicate is one of those.
So I hope I answered that question. But the public schools are delivering that. Public schools have CTE programs. They have special needs programs. They have general education. They have all the programs that employers want. Now, do we do too much testing and assessments and stuff like that squeezes out real learning? I believe so. Are the public schools perfect? No, they're not. But we got to save the public schools, and we've got to invest in public schools to make them better. The last thing we need, when we're not funding them, according to the Supreme Court, we're not fulfilling the constitutional mandate. The last thing we need is to spread our precious funds that we can't afford to subsidize people who are sending their kids to Catholic or religious or private schools. That's where it defies common sense. If we're not funding these schools, let me compare it to a family. You have a family, has 2 kids. They're having trouble feeding those kids, paying the mortgage, paying their insurance rates. So they're going to solve this problem by going out and adopting 3 more kids and bringing them into the family and feeding those kids and things. That's how Idaho is. We can't feed the kids we got now. And now we want to go out and we want to go and fund religious schools and private schools. We can't do that because we're not even doing our constitutional mandate right now.
I did not grow up with a lot. I'm not complaining. I'm just saying I didn't. And as such, when I was in elementary school and then middle school, I worked in the cafeteria. Predominantly because I found out I could get a free lunch. And
That's
I was
good.
I was very excited.
There's no such thing as a free lunch.
Well,
you got to work for it.
I had to work for it. I had to work for it. And I cannot say that my days working in the cafeteria yielded like the absolute best nutrition. I mean, I remember it would like be like pizza day. I would like grab the
cinnamon rolls.
Oh yeah, cinnamon. Well, yeah, I didn't even realize you could get breakfast. Anyway, but like tater tots, like I'd just dump ranch on them and stuff. And I'm not, again, like I was pleased to get a lunch because before I found out I could do that, I would go to school, especially in middle school. My parents had split up. My family kind of was in turmoil and I would go and I wouldn't have food. And I would just, essentially be like a seagull, like picking up scraps off people's plates. And it's embarrassing to, articulate this, but it's not my fault. I was 11, or whatever.
Right.
But I was happy that I had the cafeteria in the lunchroom. Now, they did not make the best burgers. The pizza was not incredible. The tater tots were on point, but like everything else was just kind of a hit or miss, but it was food that I got. And I've been thinking a lot about like, okay, for all of the people that have lunch as the only option coming from the school cafeteria, like what do we do with that? Where does this end as far as if it's the government's obligation or like, there are some kids that, had the free lunch program. They ate the same food that I ate and working in the cafeteria. Where do we go with this as far as like, okay, do we have like a gluten-free kitchen as well? I have lactose intolerance. Do we have like a whole separate menu for these? Like, and if the school cafeteria cannot provide the requirements for the individual kids that get the free lunch program, is it now the school's obligation to contract with another, culinary center to deliver different foods that all of these different requirements have? Or even if it's like, no, my kid can eat all this. I'm just not happy with the food you're giving him. You're going to take that money out of your school cafeteria and you're going to give it to restaurant X and they're going to deliver a meal that, may or may not check any of the requirements. Because by the way, there are really strict requirements for like what schools can make. And again, that's the federal and state regulation thing coming in. Who can work there? Like people have to be fingerprinted, everything, like you're not fingerprinting somebody at Pizza Hut. I don't even know if Pizza Hut still exists. Anyway, the point is,
yes, it does,
like,
I think.
Okay, there you go. I know Round Table for sure, but the point is that where we're going? And I just thought about this week and it's like, there was only like, they had a juice box and they had milk, right? And so they were like, hey, don't forget you're allergic to milk, like take the juice box. And I always took the chocolate milk. My stomach was not happy about it. It was like chocolate milk, haha. Where do we end with like, you're not fitting what I as a parent may want, or you don't have all the options that I could have in the free market? We should unleash this whole thing to other people. Right? Because do we go down that road where it's all of a sudden like we have 100 different options? We're obligated to contract with 100 different restaurants to provide a lunch for kids.
No, I mean, I'm kind of getting lost in your analogy.
The analogy is essentially like they were providing something, which in your position of like you have 2 kids to feed, you're not even successfully providing all of that food for the kids, which I understand. I had Representative Galaviz in here recently talking about rural school funding. But my point is that the school's charter was like, listen, provide a meal. Okay. Is the meal perfect for every single kid? Is the meal the best meal parents could ever hope for? Probably not. Right. But they were like, listen, we're providing a sufficient meal that, I was happy to get as a kid that didn't have a meal. And the alternative is like we start doing voucher programs or start subsidizing meals that you can get at a restaurant instead of the school cafeteria. Right. And again, I don't know if that's the right thing, but it would seem like a train wreck if it's like, oh, you don't like pizza today? Okay, let's get you from this restaurant or from that restaurant, or let's, open it up to every kitchen in the city that wants to compete against like the lunch people.
Well, the truth is, and this is the history in every voucher state. that the kids that are getting the vouchers, 70% have never been in the public schools. So the parents have already chosen to send their kids to private and religious schools and not to the public schools. So it's not a matter of changing lunches and things like that.
They're already eating something else.
And the kids and the research is very clear. Read Josh Cowan's book, just came out in September. He's been researching vouchers for 20 years. He can't find a study, and he's participated in many of them, pro-voucher and independent. There's no indication that a student that moves from a public school to a private or religious school does better academically. And in Idaho especially, we have almost half the counties in Idaho have no private schools, and most of our private schools are in 4 counties: Kootenai County, Ada County, Canyon County, and Twin Falls County. And so a lot of these counties might have 1 private school someplace or 2. But people who want to send their kids to private school have to drive like 2 hours each way to get their kids to that school in such a big county. So the truth is, in Idaho, even if we thought this was a good idea, we have kids all over the state that couldn't even participate in it, right? Yeah. And so why should a farmer in Oakley raise his property taxes to keep his schools open because the state can't fund them, so that some corporate executive in the north end of Boise can send their kids to a religious or private school? It's,
that they may have already been going to anyway.
Constitution aside, which you shouldn't set the Constitution aside, this is just, it's not good for our state. And the other thing is that that vouchers get so expensive that people have to, in some states like Arizona, they're starting to cause a deficit. And so they're having to cut in Arizona right now because 2 things, and Idaho's heading down this road. Under Governor Ducey, they cut the revenue base so much that it's not raising the money to fund basic services. The second thing, they layered over a universal voucher thing that was supposed to cost $65 million in the second year, and now is close to costing $1 billion. So between these 2 things, that state is running $1 billion deficit. So they're cutting education, road projects. They had to cut a $133 million water project in the most thirsty state in the whole country. So in Florida, the voucher program is going to cost between $2 and $4 billion. Tennessee just last week passed a voucher program that's going to cost taxpayers there $447 million. So what's happening is this is busting state budgets, which means that people have to raise their property taxes to fund their schools, or they're going to have to cut services. They're going to have to cut the public school budget to make up the difference. So this is as much a tax issue. If you don't have kids in the school and you don't care about this, you should care about it if you're a taxpayer. And we're all taxpayers, because in these states, the taxpayers are going to be on the hook to fund all these expensive subsidies. And they are subsidies, by the way. They are subsidies. I think that the biggest, in history is going to show they're the biggest state government handout in the history of the United States.
I have one more question for you, because I know your time's limited today. As far as employment basis around STEM goes, it's my understanding that predominantly the people coming out of schools with the best chemistry, physics, comp sci, all of these different backgrounds are coming out of the public schools, just because of the nature of having labs and funding and access to teachers and whatnot, and enough students that actually want to take those classes. generally falls, like we had an honors or an AP chemistry class, but there were only 30 kids in it, right? And my school had like my class was like 500 or something. So you need a certain concentration of population to get the appropriate number of people to justify having like an honors or an AP chemistry or an AP physics class or something of that nature. Same with math. Like you can't teach a calculus class if you only have 3 kids making it to calculus. You just don't have enough, especially from a private situation. So you need public schools of high enough population to get enough students who are competent and capable and desiring to have these things. So from a business standpoint, would you say that it is accurate to say the majority of people, or like the highest concentration of people with STEM backgrounds coming into the workforce are coming out of public schools?
Well, they have to, because let's use Idaho as an example. We have roughly 315,000 public school students. We're not sure how many homeschool and private and religious school students we have, because homeschools don't
register at all. Yeah.
Let's say they think it's between 15 and 20,000. So clearly, most of the people that are coming out of school and working in our economy are public school products of the public schools. A fraction of our students that are coming into the workforce in Idaho are private and religious school students, just because of the bare numbers.
Sure.
Now, I'm not going to criticize private or religious school education. I think I support it. I support the fact that a parent wants to send their kids to, say, Bishop Kelly, because it's got a faith-based educational system, and they learn about Catholicism. They have to go to Mass and all that. I get that. I support that, right? But that's the parent's choice. And if they can afford the tuition, and by the way, Bishop Kelly has scholarships, then they can attend there. But the taxpayers of Idaho have no responsibility to give that family money to go to Bishop Kelly. In fact, it's against the Constitution of the state of Idaho to do that. So I'm glad that there's private schools, religious schools, but those should be funded by the parents who choose that course, and not the taxpayers of Idaho. One other thing about vouchers: parents don't choose the schools choose the student. And if you look at some of the mission statements of the religious schools in Idaho, they're very clear that they want students that are Christian. They want students that agree in their philosophy about morals and cultural things.
Sure.
So what happens when, let's say, a gay student or transgender student wants to go to a religious school? They're not going to be accepted there, right? When they're openly gay, openly transgender. So,
well, I don't think we should. I think there are a lot of Catholics that I don't know what's going to happen.
I'm not talking about Catholic schools, but look at the mission statements in some of these religious schools around Idaho, and they make it very clear, really clear, that they want people to follow what they consider their Christian principles, and I think that's a good thing. But what happens when a student comes and wants to apply there that doesn't fit that category, right? Then there's discrimination. And that's what's happening across the country too. The schools choose the students, and the parents don't choose the schools.
And I think that applies, naturally across not just things like you're articulating, but also intellectual competence, proximity, like the whole thing, where it's kind of like, They can pluck the best and the brightest and go from there. And just a quick note on Bishop Kelly. I think Bishop Kelly, from everything I've heard, is a really good school.
It's a great school.
But let's be really clear. It also has an average SAT score lower than Renaissance High School, which is a public school of choice in West Ada. So it's not that it's a bad school at all. And if you want your kid to go there and attend mass and do all these things, my boys were in a private Catholic school when we lived in our former state. Like I have complete appreciation for all of that, right? But again, if the dollars that we're spending from the state of Idaho and Idaho taxpayers are supposed to go towards an academic education, then Bishop Kelly is not an example of a school that beats everyone from an academic standpoint. In fact, it does not. Renaissance High School is higher. So again, I hear what you're saying, and I have a great appreciation for people wanting a more religious, faith-based education or that kind of environment for the kids. Absolutely. But it seems to me, or at least it's been explained to me, that the Constitution is talking about education, academics. and not just how do you feel about your kid at school. And again, I don't know anything about it, but that's what people tell me. It's like, okay, that makes sense.
Well, if you read Section 1 of our Constitution, Idaho, the founders were really clear that the purpose of education was to create citizens who could be good citizens in the republic. In fact, it says, I'm paraphrasing, that education, the purpose of education is to perpetuate our democratic republic in the United States. And the way we do that is through a thorough, uniform, free, public education system. So the founders were pretty clear. They didn't talk about job skills. They didn't say we need computer programmers. They didn't say we're doing education because we need construction workers.
Right.
They were very clear that the purpose of education was to create citizens that would support the Republican form of government that we have in the United States. But then they're also clear in Section 5 and another section that money should not be spent to support religious schools. So, you just have to keep going back to the Constitution. If voucher people want to change the Constitution, they should do it the right way. They should pass a resolution, joint resolution, by 2/3 of each chamber of the legislature, and then take the question of the people of Idaho. If they want to fund religious schools, they should do it like the Constitution says it should be done. Don't change the Constitution by statute. Change the Constitution by a constitutional amendment. But they don't do that. And the reason they don't do that is because every time vouchers is on the ballot in any state, it loses because the people of the state support their public education system.
Rod Grammer, I appreciate you. Thank you for coming in,
Thank you
sir.
for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing what businesses want and your perspective on this. Again, I'm talking to a lot of people because I really want to know. And man, I haven't had anybody from the business industry. So thank you. Hopefully we can do it again.
I hope so too.